grandparents are a very diverse group with different physical abilities and capabilities. And in every stage, there can be ways for bonding with the generations. It is very important to link the generations, and it has a lot of benefits for the old and for the young and for the community as well. With longevity, a lot of the time you'll hear people saying that there's greater possibility to become grandparents nowadays, because even if your kids are marrying later and having kids later, you will still be around. But of course, we hear about marriage, hear about why people don't want to be parents and so forth. Some people may just wonder whether they could be grandparents even when they have children. And with low fertility added on it, in the future, we are going to see more of a bimpo family structure. So imagine bimpo, a long bimpo with like 5 generations maybe in a household, but really very few members in each generation. If you talk about what kind of model types, explicit expectations are there for grandparenting, so this is one of the earlier ones that talks about grandparenting style as there are 5 types. Some are detached, passive, influential, supportive, and also authoritative. And then in another study, people talk about when you look at grandparents that take care of grandchildren, there are 4 types of carers that you can find, like avid, flexible, selective, and hesitant carers. In our own research, this is one of our earlier research, a lot of the focus was on to care or not to care for grandparents, when they to care for grandchildren. So we find that there's like ambivalence pretty strong, where despite declaring that, okay, I think grandchildren is not my responsibility, but grandparents quite usually will continue to do so out of love and concern. In this study, we also found that, grandparents, well, with the ambivalence, they also want to enjoy life. They also want to have more, social and leisure engagements with their grandchildren. They don't want to be seen just as somebody who care for grandchildren and that's their only role. In my other research, I do see older people coming forward and having interactions and engagements with children that are not their grandchildren. As early as 2005, there was a task force on grandparenting and intergenerational bonding. There was like Grandparents Day established during that time, the Grandparent of the Year Award, and so forth. The National Family Week in 2006 was about celebrating 3 generations, and it says here, if I know grandchildren were so fun, I will have them first. If you're aware, there are actually all kinds of intergenerational programs around in our, for schools, from VIA projects and so forth, for childcare, interacting with senior centers, and in different kind of capacities. All these intergenerational programs, even though they are interacting with people who are not their grandparents, the young people actually became more interested in their grandparents as a result of this interaction with other older people in the community. And they started to want to know more about the stories of their own grandparents as well. For those of us working in intergenerational field, to have programs that are shared sites or co-locations are very one of the best ways to promote intergenerational connections. NTUC Health, working with that first school, has done a good system for all the centers to be connected, to have intergenerational engagements. I remember in one of the presentations, the director was saying, the children were so excited about going to meet the seniors, maybe that they meet every week. So the teacher was asking the girl, like, why were you so happy to go and meet the seniors? And the girl said, because I make Amma smile. Sometimes parents themselves are quite reserved, so it's really not everyone will take to such ideas. So I hope that they will be more open and use this as a good opportunities to foster and to promote their own relationships within the family as well.
Let me start by stating what we mean by building intergenerational bonds. That has to do with building relationship between parents, children, grandparents, grandchildren, great-grandparents, great-grandchildren over 3 or more generations. My grandma is a single mother, and she continued to work tirelessly to earn income for her family. I never got to see my grandpa. He passed away before I was born. So my grandma took care of me and my mother. My education, so I stayed with her. She gave emotional support to my mother, who is a divorcee, and I was 4 years old. And as a schoolboy, I had to take care of grandma's physical being and needs, running out errands. What's important to know is that because of my close relationship with my grandma, I stayed with her, so there's every opportunity for her to teach me about life. And the way she teaches is by telling stories about her own experiences. And I think that's how we start to bond between grandma and grandson. And not only that, my grandma would bring me as a child to her workplace because she's working. I was then married, happily married later when I grew big. That was 35 years ago. This is a matchmake marriage. And we aged gracefully as a married couple for 35 years. And this is my firstborn child. And after that, I have 3 more children after my firstborn child. And what's important is that we maintain the intergenerational bond by making sure that when we go for outing as family, I would bring my wife, children, and my mother. And the 2 most influential women in my life is, of course, my mother and my wife. I had also took the opportunity to bond with my mother personally by taking her out on outing from time to time. The important thing about parenting is that you have to learn to transmit the right values to the children. Now, even my grandma, all right, he always emphasized on attitude, etiquette, courtesy, kindness, compassion. I had my first grandchild, a baby boy. I have become a grandfather. And then my son and my grandson, we spend time together on weekends. This is called the intergenerational bonding. You could see here, my mother, my son, my grandson, my grandson is her great-grandson. So in conclusion, but this is the benefits of international bonding. Firstly, strengthen family ties across generations. Secondly, build supportive relationships among parents, children, and grandparents. And we learn to appreciate the roles of parenting and grandparenting, especially in the transmission of values. We can rely on grandparents as caregivers, comforters, supporters, teachers, mediators, and uniting force.
I'm Ezekiel. I'm a 17-year-old. I was born in a multi-generational household. So all 7 of us, it was my grandparents from my mother's side, myself, my parents, and my aunt and uncle. During the day, everyone else would go out to work. So naturally, my primary caregiver would be my grandmother, and we would spend time together every single day. I think my grandmother, in that sense, became my nanny. So she taught me many basic things growing up. And the picture on the right really sums that up, because you see me building blocks at my grandmother's house. And even though it's a very simple picture, it really sums up how I learned these basic motor skills from my grandmother. And when my grandfather was present, he worked part-time during that period. He was that strong, silent figure in the background. And I would begin to learn life lessons from a very young age from my grandparents. Amidst that, we also continued to bond. Even though we took a family trip to Japan with all of us, even though my parents were there, my grandmother was still my primary caretaker, as she would carry me around, even from such a young age. And the other picture was from a trip that only me and my grandparents went on. So this really sums up our relationship and how we had time just to ourselves to bond. I entered primary school in 2014. At that point of time, I still stayed with my grandparents, and my primary school was just right across the road. So this close relationship was still maintained because I still stayed with them. And of course, this is Singapore, so the emphasis on academics is definitely there. So this idea of tough love began to come about, especially when I began to grow older, when I began to start school, primary 2, primary 3. When I would come back from school, I still have distinct memories of her scolding me, asking me to do my homework, testing me English and Chinese spelling, punishing me when I would get the answers wrong, and even hiding my storybooks as I would read them instead of doing my homework. And at the same time, this was balanced by me and my family still going on trips together, having fun together. towards the end of 2016, both my uncle's family and my family moved out from our intergenerational household. So I stayed with my grandmother, seeing her almost every single day, every hour of every day, up to I was 9 years old. I went from that to just seeing her for a few hours every day. Our relationship definitely took a strain. Our bond was also weakened because as a youth myself, engaging with the beginning stages of puberty, I began to find my grandmother's tough love or ideas of scolding me as being naggy or thinking that she didn't really understand what I was going through. So this led to a strain in my relationship with my grandparents. And for a period of time, I would dread going to my grandmother and grandfather's house every single day after school. While it wasn't something that I wanted to happen, it was certainly how I felt at that point of time. There was a turning point in 2019 when my grandparents went to Europe for 3 months, and it really was the first extended period of time that I didn't get to see them and interact with them. I learned to appreciate my grandparents more, and I learned to appreciate the little things that my grandmother would do for me. As of now, as a student in JC, I definitely have a more hectic schedule, and I see my grandparents a lot lesser than I used to when I was young. But nevertheless, we still try to keep up the bond with weekly gatherings, celebrating special occasions, birthdays together. We still try to have dedicated time together by going overseas together, especially as I'll be able to see them every day overseas. This also brings about another idea of a change in our relationship dynamics. Because when I was young, when I was growing up, when my grandparents raised me, they taught me the very simplest things in life. But now, this relationship has sort of changed, that I'm able to take care of my grandparents in some ways. For example, when they lose their SingPass password, when they forget their ATM PIN, I think they recognize too that growing up in a world that's increasingly digitalized, these are some areas of strength that as a youth I'm able to help them with. I think that my relationship with my grandparents definitely is special, and it's a bond that lasted for many years, and it's something that I have begun to appreciate both for its longevity and both for how it has evolved and changed.